Back here on the Better Live Than Dead podcast. Joining us now on the FanDuel hotline, he is the co-host of Neutral Ice on 91.3 WBNY, as well as a writer for SabersHockeyCentral.com. He is Brayton Wilson. Now, Brayton, before I let you say hello to the wonderful podcast land, I must say, not only can you follow, but you should be following Brayton on Twitter at BJWilsonSHC. With that introduction, how you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing good. It just seems like that you can't get enough of me.
You know, I was going to say, I don't think the people of the podcast know at this point in time exactly how much we've talked and hung out this week, but at this point, you know, we're probably pushing, I would say, well over, 15 hours of talking about hockey, about hanging out and just doing hockey work. So that's why I have you on the podcast this week.
I mean, yeah, we spent probably good 7-8 hours covering the trade deadline, and then even when we got home, it was like 1 or 2 in the morning, and we ended up talking trade deadline stuff again.
Well, it's just all part of the hustle, man. We gotta keep it up, and there's a lot of people out there in the in internet land that really do value our opinions. So we have to keep up our appearances and keep the podcast fresh over at SabersHockeyCentral.com, and we also just have to just sit around and talk about hockey because that is a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Now, speaking of the National Hockey League, the reason you are here this afternoon, I do want to ask you first off, what were your impressions of the trade deadline now that all is said and done and the dust is settled, and we've had a couple games for players to settle into their new roles?
Right. Yeah. Well, you can definitely tell from the trade deadline who are the buyers and who are the sellers. The Buffalo Sabres and the Arizona Coyotes were the definition of sellers, and the definition of buyers was a team like the Chicago Blackhawks, where they went out and got Kimmo Timonen, those got Antoine Vermette, the Rangers, where they got Keith Yandle from the Coyotes. I mean, the trade deadline this year was very, very, buyer seller, just evenly split sort of thing. Like you could tell who was a buyer and who was a seller compared to other years where it's like, we don't know if this team's going to be a seller or a buyer, or we don't know if this team's going to be a seller or a buyer. So, but this year definitely you could tell like who was trying to sell, who was trying to buy, and especially like a team like the Leafs where they were trying to sell, but everybody was at such a high value that they couldn't really sell at all. So.
Well, for stuff like that, too, before I ask you the next question I was going to ask you, stuff like that, and you and I both know this very well, and Tim Murray mentioned this as well in his press conference following the trade deadline, that there's part trades, part digging the ditches for future trades. So there may be a trade that happens in June or July where a general manager or Tim Murray of the Sabres will say, yeah, this deal almost happened at the deadline in March, but obviously we couldn't swing it because we couldn't do this or this couldn't work or that, whatever the case may be. You'll probably hear, and even we heard, like with the Evander Kane deal where Tim Murray said, I've been contacting this guy on and off for 3 years. He knows what I want. That's all you do. Sometimes the deadline may be making blockbuster deals. Sometimes the deadline is making blockbuster phone calls and just letting people know what you want, what you're willing to give up, and then you sit on it. You let it linger for a few months, and then they may come calling and say, hey, you really want that guy still? Because we'll totally do that trade now.
Right. Right, yeah. I mean, we saw with the Evander Kane trade. I mean, Tim Murray said he was talking for years about Evander Kane and wanting to acquire him, even when he was with the Senators. And then he comes into Buffalo and says, hey, are you still interested in giving up Kane or anything like that? And then when the whole situation where the tracksuit and throwing it into the shower situation came up where Kane was having shoulder surgery and he wasn't going to be playing, but still he was available, Tim Murray's like, you know what, I'm taking advantage of that. Let's make a deal. And they ended up making a deal, and I think it benefits the Buffalo Sabres in the long haul. For the Jets, it benefits them right now. But yeah, like you said, it may take years. It may take just a couple of days to discuss a deal, but this year's trade deadline was quite interesting to see how deals were made, how deals have panned out, and especially this year where it's a seller's market and a buyer's market, the clear cuts. It was intriguing to see how this trade deadline went down.
especially because you called the Max Talbot deal to Boston, and then I kind of called the way that Tim Murray dealt Chris Stewart. You just flat out said Jordan Caron is being traded. I think that that would be good to go to Colorado for Max Talbot, and then that happened. And then I sat there and said to you and to another blogger, a friend of ours, that I really wonder if Tim Murray may have called earlier today and said, this is what I want. Tell me what you can give me. And then he went and circled around last minute, and come to find out, Murray made the phone call 3 minutes before the deadline hit. The deadline clock struck 0 and made the deal for Chris Stewart. So I guess we're both pretty we were pretty hot that day. We're on fire. If we're talking NBA Jam, we were on fire with our calls that day.
Yeah, every time that we sent out a tweet, it was just blazing on fire, just like NBA Jams.
Well, we are not some members of the Buffalo media, that is for sure. There are some guys out there that I don't want to mention any names because I'm not sure if they're listening. I don't want to make anybody mad, but friends of ours will know when we talk about the fire tweets. They'll know what we're talking about and who we're talking about. And you and myself were very, very lucky to have seen a local member of the media shooting off some scalding hot takes, and we are very, very pleased to have been in that room and witnessed the I don't even know the word, if the word exists. Idiocy, I think, is the word I'm looking for. Stupidity.
No, I think you hit it right on the dot. No, I mean with that specific media member, yeah, that was scolding hot takes might be the kindest way to put it.
White hot takes. Now before we get ourselves in trouble, Brayton, I do want to ask you, who do you think were the big winners of the trade deadline this year?
Well, I think I mentioned it earlier. The Coyotes were able to trade, two key pieces of their team to probably the biggest winners of the trade deadline, Chicago and the New York Rangers. Chicago acquires Antoine Vermette, a very, very skilled forward who can play center, who can play wing. He wins you key faceoffs that you need to win. He's just a guy that you can put in front of the net, and he can be able to find the loose puck and create a lot of chances. Antoine Vermette's going to be a huge part to not the Coyotes, but the Blackhawks within the last few months of the season. And I think it makes them a huge Stanley Cup contender, adding Vermette, especially to a team that's already stacked the way they are. And then the New York Rangers adding Keith Yandle to a defense that's already extremely, extremely good, with Ryan McDonough, Dan Girardi, Mark Stahl, and a few other guys that are just phenomenal in that New York Rangers defense core. I think those are your two big winners, one from the East, one from the West, that really have improved their chances astronomically to be a Stanley Cup contender this year and even contend for years down the road to come. I mean, Antoine Vermette's going to be a UFA come July 1st this year, but who knows what the Chicago Blackhawks have in plan. Maybe they create some cap space to re-sign Vermette, or Vermette hits free agency and re-signs in Arizona. There's been talks about that, but this trade deadline, again, the trade deadline, it's just who's the buyer, who's the seller. And the winners of the trade deadline were definitely the Chicago Blackhawks and the New York Rangers.
Now, speaking of the Arizona Coyotes, they kind of raised some red flags because obviously we all know that they're as the media puts it, they're tanking. They want to finish dead last. I know I try to avoid the tanking thing because I don't want to be lumped in with everybody, but we have fun with it. I mean, we get the photoshops of the tanks with Tim Murray on them. It's a lot of fun. But Arizona didn't deal UFAs. They dealt Vermette was a UFA obviously, but two of the guys they dealt had term and they kept money. Do you have a problem with Arizona doing that to get worse and get rid of players who have term on their contract just so they could be a bad team?
Well, no, I don't think it's a problem. It's It's just sort of the risk that you try and take with trying to be the worst team in the league. I mean, you look at the Sabres. It's just like the Sabres got rid of Torrey Mitchell, Chris Stewart, Michael Neuwirth, who was their best goaltender probably all of this year. I mean, they were able to trade Jonas Enroth, but I mean, Michael Neuwirth in the past 10 games, he was putting up better stats than Jonas Enroth was all year. Um, so I think that, going back to the question, there's absolutely risk of, trading away guys and retaining money, but, the ultimate goal, especially for the teams who are trying to tank, are McDavid or Eichel. So, I think that there's absolutely a risk, but if that's what your goal is right now, then you got to shoot for it.
Now you mentioned the Buffalo Sabres. I cannot let you be on the podcast and make your Better Live Than Dead debut. Being a writer for Sabres Hockey Central, obviously, so I know you're good at talking about the Sabres, mostly because I'm the one editing all of your articles that you post and recaps that you post. So I figured while I have you here, I might as well ask you, what are your thoughts on how the Buffalo Sabres are playing recently, and what are your thoughts on the immediate future of the Buffalo Sabres?
Well, they're playing as bad as they can play. That's for sure. With the way that they not only played tonight, but the way that they've been playing since the trade deadline, or even after they traded Enroth and traded for Kane. They've been winning, but they have been playing very bad at the same time. They've been getting those really lucky wins. Tonight they went out and got a 2-0 lead on Ottawa, and they ended up losing it and losing 3-2. That's how it's going to be the rest of this season. It's just the way it's going to be. This team is going to get those lucky, fluky wins where they'll beat a good team, like 3-2 in a shootout or overtime or even a regulation, and then they'll play teams that are just as bad as they are, and they'll lose 6-1 to them. It's the last 17 games of the year are going to be very interesting to see how it's going to pan out, because this team may play well in some of those games. This team may play absolutely horrible in the last few games. So, I'm just looking forward to this season being over with and getting to, April when they do the draft lottery night and seeing where the Sabres actually end up, whether they end up at number 1 or number 2. Because I don't think they're going to end up anywhere beyond number 1 or number 2.
Well, I was going to tell you, someone I can't, and I feel really bad for forgetting who said this on Twitter a couple days ago, but it makes this whole process, puts it into a very good light. It's the race for the race for Eichel with a shot at McDavid, because we all know if you finish 30th, you have the best shot of getting McDavid. But historically, teams who finish dead last don't get the first overall pick, so you're likely, if you finish dead last, you get Jack Eichel. But I know, Brayton, you feel the same way I do. Either or, I'll be totally fine with.
Yeah, 100%.
And I do want to mention, just for listening purposes, it's Saturday. It's early Saturday morning at the time of this podcast, so obviously the Sabres play Sunday night against the Washington Capitals. So at the moment, the big news would be that morning skate, the Buffalo Sabres announced that Chad Johnson, acquired from the Islanders in the deal for Michael Neuvirth, he would start tonight, make his Buffalo Sabres debut. But apparently something happened in the morning skate where he injured his lower body. And apparently he is set to potentially miss the rest of the season. So that was fun while it lasted, I guess.
Anders Lindback and Andrei Makarov as our starting goaltenders. Oh boy, that sounds like
and you know what?
Phenomenal. Yeah. It's the 17 games.
It sounds a great way to spend the rest of the season, but here's another thing too. The Kevin Aklubja of the Democrat and Chronicle pointed out the Amerks have a weird chunk of their schedule where they play one game in 13 days. So there's a strong possibility that Matt Hackett could be in Washington tomorrow night with the Buffalo Sabres, or coming up with the Buffalo Sabres sometime soon, because obviously there's been a lot of talk of him playing 7 games so he can be a restricted free agent instead of an unrestricted free agent. I don't think he gets there, but there's always a possibility. I mean, at this point, anything's possible with this hockey team. We thought that the Sabres would finish out the season with Girgensons and Ennis getting 20 goals, and Girgensons rumored to have broken his foot or his ankle. We don't know. And it's like, where did the fun of the season go? Because obviously right now it's all about small victories.
Got flushed right down the toilet. That's where it went.
Exactly. We try to stay positive. We try to have fun with it, but do promise you that things will get better for us. We will be happier in the near future, especially once this offseason starts, because there's a lot of money to be spent, a lot of trades to be made, a lot of teams to pick out to kind of pick from, because of the cap situation. The Buffalo Sabres will likely acquire a goaltender either through free agency or a trade this offseason. So a lot of fun stuff coming up. I'm sure Brayton will have you on again sometime soon. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait to be back on again.
You sound so excited to be here.
It's 2:00 in the morning. It's
Before we let you go, man, I just want to mention again, co-host of Neutral Ice on 91.3 WBNY. I was there Monday night, post deadline. Thank you again for first off for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome anytime to join.
I do appreciate that. I will be back. I promise. I'll be back sometime soon. Check it out on YouTube. Listen. I believe if the live feed's not down, they'll have it up on YouTube, but if the live feed is working, you can go right to WBNY's website and listen live. Also, check out SabresHockeyCentral.com. Brayton writes almost all the previews, does a bunch of recaps, writes articles here and there. He just had a recent article go up about Nick Baptiste, a Sabres prospect, playing in Erie with Connor McDavid. Funny we mentioned that.
That game was fun. That was a fun game.
I saw that. Yeah, absolutely. I saw that there was a big lead, and then a lot of goals, and then a little lead, and then Erie took back off and scored a lot more goals. And I figured you picked the right game to go to that night.
Right. Oh yeah. I mean, McDavid scored 5 points that night. I mean, McDavid is the real deal. For people who have not seen McDavid play before, and if are asking, what kind of player can McDavid be? In my personal opinion, and if this doesn't turn out, you can come back at me and whine at me all you want. Well, McDavid is going to be better than Crosby.
It's going to be on the internet, so it's going to be around forever and ever and ever. But please, I'm sorry I cut you off. Please repeat that so we can get a clear-cut audio of that.
Connor McDavid is going to be better than Sidney Crosby.
Fair enough. I love how you cleared your throat too to get the clear audio for me. I appreciate that.
Oh, no problem whatsoever.
Now, one last thing before we go. I have to pump your Twitter account at BJ Wilson SHC on Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And keep saying one last thing. The final thing. I have been practicing my radio voice. I will debut it sometime soon, but I'm working on it.
From the diaphragm. I told you, from the diaphragm, you should bring up your voice.
I'll tell you what. Everywhere I go, I'm talking to people. Like the time I met Matthew Collar. I sit down and talk to him, and I'm like, I can see where the voice comes from, but I just hear the normal voice, and then I hear him on the radio, and I'm like, who is that guy? Or like you're sitting there, and we're talking, and all of a sudden you just like turned it up to 10, and I was like, oh, I forgot about that. It's been a while since I've been on the radio.
Yeah, it's been a little bit, but when it's one thing, you may hear me talk like I am on the podcast, but then when I turn on the radio, it's like you almost become a totally different person. Yeah, radio's fun. Radio's absolutely fun. If anybody ever gets a chance to do radio work, it's completely different, but it's absolutely fun. If you can't go one day on the radio and then just like come out of it and say you didn't have fun.
That's one thing I always knew I had. That's why I do a podcast now, because I just love being in front of a microphone.
Yeah, it's especially with doing podcast stuff. It's very similar to radio, but I love podcasting. Don't get me wrong. I love podcasting with you. I love podcasting with whoever it is that decides to invite me to a podcast. But it's like there's nothing better than being on live radio and talking the way that you do on live radio, and it's just like it's so fun. It's absolutely so fun.
All right, I must say, I'm looking at this hockey stick now. Thank you again for the hockey stick, by the way.
Oh gosh, yeah.
For the autographed Ville Leino hockey stick, and thank you for.
You'll set it up in your podcasting room, and
it's actually leaning up against the wall right now in the Wolf Den studio right now.
Yeah, but we talked about it. You'll probably set it up with some L hooks and everything like that. It's much better than it was sitting in my parents' closet.
Well, I can see why I was in the closet. Yeah, for sure, but. It's 2:01 Eastern Time on Saturday morning, so Brayton, I want to say thank you again for joining me, and go get some sleep.
Yeah, I'll definitely try, and thank you for having me again. Hope to be on with you once more.
We'll have you sometime soon. Thanks again, man.
Yeah, no problem. And just one more thing, just for a free plug party. I've got a mock draft that I'm going to be posting on SabersHockeyCentral.com coming up within the next couple of days. And what the process that I did was I projected out every team's results for the rest of the season, their playoff rankings. So I literally, panned it out for you. And where I think everybody's going to finish, I'm going to have like a draft simulator to see who gets the first overall pick. We'll see how it goes, and then we'll go from there.
And then what? You cut out. I lost you.
Oh, okay. And then we'll basically just go from there. I've got the mock draft done. I just got to do a simulator draft lottery where I just pick a name out of a hat basically. And it's just like, the Devils win the draft lottery or some stupid crazy crap like that. But we'll see what happens. I mean, I got it all done. It's coming up within probably the next day or two on Sabres Hockey Central.
It'll be everywhere. Check it out. Thanks again for joining us, man.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Have a good night.
Yep, you too.
Thanks.